Flight Risk, the movie.
Say hi to your mother
Jeez.
for me.
Let's talk about it. Hey, great to have you here. So today I'll be reviewing the Mel Gibson directed movie called Flight Risk. I went into this movie not expecting much, since the trailer looks so bizarre, but it seemed like a fitting stream-at-home type of movie. This action thriller involves an eccentric fugitive named Winston, played by Topher Grace, who begins the movie in an isolated part of Alaska and getting caught by this US Marshal named Madeline, played by Michelle Dockery, who I don't know too well. Here we're met with Mark Wahlberg's character, who plays a pilot that goes by Daryl and comes across as this rural jokester. While on the flight, Madeline and Winston discover that Daryl, their pilot, isn't exactly who he says he is, and instead works for this mobster named Moretti, who's involved with the case that Winston's testifying against. Throughout the film, I wondered if Wahlberg was actually Moretti himself, but that isn't the case, and I don't think we ever actually learn his name throughout the movie. The rest of the movie plays out mostly as you would expect, with a stereotypical suspenseful plot. However, the further I got along in the movie, the less on edge I was, since the threat decreases and we do a lot of foreshadowing. For me, the climax of the film was mostly a letdown and went pretty much as expected. Looking at the pros and cons for this film, starting with the pros, my first one is the premise of this movie has some pretty strong points to it. For the first 20 minutes on the plane, I thought they were headed in a decent direction. Like when Topher Grace's character finds the dead pilot's ID on the floor in front of him, particularly stood out as a tense scene. My second pro that kind of builds on the first one, the helplessness of being in an airborne plane with an assassin was well reflected here. They would frequently hit turbulence, and you can really feel the shakiness of what feels like a poorly maintained plane. It really captured the feeling of being trapped in a specific situation, similar to the movie Phone Booth, but in even more peril here. And then for my third pro, while I don't really know Michelle Dockery as an actor, I thought she did pretty well as the lead for this movie. She was great at expressing various emotions throughout the roller coaster experience she was thrown into, and I'd be interested in watching more movies that she's in the future. Now switching over to the cons, the first one being the film has a bit of an identity crisis. At times it's going for intense, gripping moments, and then at others it gets super silly. Like the opening, we have Topher Grace microwaving his noodles, being so goofy, and then we also have to talk about Mark Wahlberg's look. I don't really get why they chose to shave his head to look balding. You can clearly see his hairline, and for the plot, I don't really get why bother to include this. The only explanation I can really give to myself is that maybe he would have been recognized by somebody earlier in the movie without having that wig on, but that's probably giving them a bit too much credit. Expanding on that silliness a little bit more, you have moments of guns being shot while flying that don't really matter. You type Mark Wahlberg 3 separate times, and then have ridiculous CGI in the landing scene. The movie clearly works best as a turn your brain off type of film, so I totally get that. I just wish it was a little bit more serious. My second con for the film is the lack of tension this thriller has. Once we learn about Madeline's past, we wind up learning that she got somebody killed in her previous job, and that pretty much seals that she's not going to let it happen again, removing any uncertainty of how the story's going to end. And then third con I'll point out is the phone conversations that the plot is driven by didn't really work for me. We do this whole loop where Madeline thinks her boss, played by Leah Remini, is the mole, and then she realizes that it's actually further up the chain, and suddenly her boss is killed off, and we conveniently get all the evidence wrapped up with the final phone call in this ambulance, but even with that, there's not much of an in-movie payoff. It just felt a bit like we went on this phone conversation journey just for the sake of it, and then the big bad villain suddenly admits to everything, which seemed like something that would only happen in a movie, like a Scooby-Doo, you got me, and I would have gotten away with it type of moment. Overall, as I mentioned, I went into this movie not expecting much, so in that sense, maybe I liked it a little bit more than I thought I would. My final score for Flight Risk is a 4 out of 10. Early on, it had some tense moments, and the recognizable actors mixed with decent acting keeps you intrigued, but by no means is it a good movie that I would recommend. It's a silly action thriller similar to something like Carry On that I reviewed previously here on the channel. So those were my thoughts. Did you see this movie? If so, what'd you think of it? What'd you think of Mark Wahlberg's look? It did make me wonder though. I don't think he plays a villain too often, so that was cool getting to see him change things up a bit here. Let's talk all things Flight Risk down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.